All right. Well, it is 2 p.m. Eastern time, so we're going to get things started. I see attendees keep coming in, which is great. Thanks, everyone, so much for joining us today, Wednesday, July 29th, for our final Business Essentials topic in the series and our final educational event for this kind of 2-month period as we reevaluate what we're going to focus on in August and September. We've got a survey pool later on today that's going to allow you to kind of help dictate where we're going to head in terms of education over the next 2 months. And your voice is very much appreciated. So anything that you have to share in that area, we really do appreciate it. I'm Corey Salem. I'm filling in for Joel today, helping him out, joined by Allison Salem and Dr. Michael Brown. Allison, I know we've got some questions before about kind of the third face or maybe the fourth face on the Zoom meeting. So Allie, I've helped out a couple of times. She's really kind of sitting in and helping out with the chat box. And if there's any questions, I know people are always like, does she have anything to share? Or does Corey have anything to share? And we're just here to help. If you always want to know our opinion, feel free to message us and we'd be more than happy to provide that. But we're here today with Dr. Michael Brown, really eager to hear what he has to share on today's topic, strategic planning, reimagining the strategic planning process for a new normal. So I know that we're all really excited for what that entails today. As always, just going to run through the laundry list of items before we dive into the topic. First and foremost, everyone who's joining us today, you're all on mute, which means that we don't need, and you don't need to be concerned about any background noise. We can't hear that. But that does mean that if you do have any questions or if you do have anything to share, you can do that in 2 ways. Typically, if you have something to share, we ask that you put that in the chat box and make sure that that chat box is kind of selected as all panelists and attendees so everyone in the session can see the information you're willing to share. If you have anything just for the panelists, myself, Allie, and Dr. Brown, you can just say all panelists and we'll be the only ones that see that. Additionally, if you have any questions that you'd like for me to pass on to Dr. Brown as he's speaking, you can use the Q&A tool in your Zoom dashboard. That will indicate to me that there's a question from the crowd. And as an audience, you can keep that up and monitor that yourself and give a thumbs up to the questions that you want to hear the answer from the most. And that's going to help us kind of manage as we get more questions, the one that we should tackle first. Additionally, just like every other session that we offer, we've got 3 polls for you today that I'll be throwing those out intermittently. I will be giving you notices whenever those are about to go out, whenever you have a couple of minutes left to answer that. And I'll also be sharing the poll results live as they come in today. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Brown for the main event. So, Dr. Brown, let's talk about strategic planning, shall we?
For sure. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Allie. Thank you for those who are participating in this webinar today. As I was seeing different names kind of begin to flying up on the chat, I recognize many of you. I'm guessing that you have been returning and are continuing to engage in these webinars. For me, it's been super awesome, because this is number 5 that I've had the opportunity to host. But it's a little different than the other 4. The other 4 kind of fell more into the wellness series of, if you've been kind of tracking with me in some of my work during this pandemic alongside of Unique Venues, we've been talking about how to stay relationally connected, how to maintain physical vitality, emotional well-being, and even extraordinary leadership during unprecedented times. So this is actually a very different kind of webinar that I'm hosting alongside of Unique Venues as a consultant with them, because it kind of gets into that nitty and gritty strategic planning, which I quite honestly love talking about, because many people know me as a life coach and I talk about some of those personal, professional dynamics, but a lot of my work, quite honestly, is with organizations all around the country, focusing in on this idea of becoming the best organizations, the elite organizations, if I can use that term, particularly during times like these. And so I do a lot of the wellness work, but also I love some of that strategy, consulting, helping organizations become amazing and elite. And that's one of the reasons I partner with Unique Venues. In fact, one of the reasons that Unique Venues, if I can brag about them for a moment, they did not ask me to do this, this is unsolicited, is why they're continuing to be on the front edge of all that's happening in the industry that we're all a part of, is because a lot of these conversations I'm about to engage in with you, we've been having with Unique Venues for the last couple of years. Chuck Salem, obviously CEO and president, has been really a front runner in regards to what does it look like to build an organization that is innovative, creative. And so in my role with Unique Venues particularly, they've just been hungry to really be on the cutting edge. And so if you're like, wow, they seem like they're navigating this pandemic so well, it's because we're all kind of working through some of these ideas that I'm going to share with you today. And so I say that because I'm only going to give you a teaser today in our, 53 minutes together. And so if you're wanting to dive deeper and you're wanting to actually engage in a strategic planning process as we kind of view it and as I'm imagining it, particularly for this new normal, please reach out to Unique Venues and we can obviously provide that extra voice and support for you as we move into this uncharted territory of, I wanted to say almost new normal post-COVID, but we're still kind of in the middle of this. And I think that it's not going away. And obviously how we navigate this terrain is going to be really important in the weeks, in the months, in the years to come. So that said, you have jumped into a webinar with me entitled Reimagining the Strategic Planning Process for a New Normal. And what's interesting, many of you are in the hospitality business as planners, as leaders, as coordinators, and even as you read kind of the description, I too serve in that role. I direct sales and marketing for conference and event services at Bowling Green State University is one of the roles and the hats that I wear. So I can relate to many of you who are in the hospitality business, in the conference and event and services business, because we here at Bowling Green State University are dealing with the exact same issues. How do we plan when it seems like everything's out of our control? How do we move forward and build when there's a temptation to bunker? And so I'm glad you're joining this webinar today because for many organizations right now, they're bunkering. They are going inward and just holding on for dear life as opposed to building out a bright and better tomorrow, which we have to do. And I'm excited to be able to share some of these thoughts with you. So I'm hoping that the description that we've talked about, even as you read about this particular webinar, I don't know if any of you, and feel free to jump in, have been involved in a strategic planning process, but as I work with organizations all over the country, oftentimes when we use the term strategic planning, everyone just kind of rolls their eyes and sighs because they know what that means. It means we're going to take a week and we're going to gather together. We're going to have these long, drawn out conversations. We're going to develop this big, huge, thick, hefty document. We're going to take a deep breath and say, look, we did it. We've had a strategic planning process. We're going to stick it in a drawer and it's going to have no daily impact upon what we're doing. Friends, I want to propose to you something different. I want to propose to you kind of a fresh paradigm, a reimagined strategic planning process that I'm using in my own organizations that I'm connected to, including right here at Bowling Green State University and Conference Services, as well as in my personal life. So what's really fun, and this is why I'm so excited to be able to kind of share these things with you. I'm just going to today share with you 8 words. 8 words that are the essentials to a reimagined strategic planning process that can be applied in a pandemic world, in a world of unrest, in a world where the economy is fluctuating all the time. I'm just going to offer you 8 words that are actually going to help us dive into this discussion, that actually is going to help organizations as well as personal life changes. So these same 8 words that I use as we talk about strategic planning is also the exact same 8 words that I use as I help develop people personally to become the best version of themselves. So I'll begin with this before I give you those 8 words. Actually, let me give you the 8 words first. So if you're taking notes today, this is the only thing you need to write down. And then within the next couple of days, latest will be next Monday, you'll actually receive a document that has all of these kind of pieces together that will be yours for review. And then you can decide, this is what it looks like. Do I want to continue to engage in this process with Michael Brown and Unique Venues and so forth? But here are the 8 words. Word number 1, and I call them the 8 essentials. Perspective. Perspective. Secondly, priorities. First, perspective. Secondly, priorities. Third, a plan. So perspective, priorities, a plan. Fourth, people. So again, we're halfway done, right? Perspective, priorities, a plan, and then people. 4 more words. Preparation. You're gonna love this. If any of you are into alliteration, I am. So they're all gonna be P's, so you can hopefully remember. Perspective, priorities, plan, people, preparation, 3 more. Proactivity. Problem solving, and finally, persistence. So let me say those one more time, and then we're gonna dive in a little bit. Perspective, priorities, plan, people, preparation, proactivity, problem solving, and persistence. See, for me, these are the essential ingredients for success. Now, it's not about a strategic planning consecutive step process. It's about always revisiting these 8 ideas as we're involved in an ongoing strategic planning conversation and process. So that said, let me begin, or at least interject this thought, that elite organizations never tire of the question, what next? And exceptional leaders within organizations of this nature are preoccupied with the future while still performing at high levels in the present. And that's when sometimes the challenge with strategic planning comes in, is we think we're gonna dream all this stuff in the future, but we have to pause everything in the present to do so. No, they happen simultaneously. Elite organizations always have an eye on the future while still performing at high levels in the present. So leaders, and obviously you're at different levels of your organization. So some of you already are saying, amen. And we need that kind of leadership within our organization, right? And others of you don't get to make those kind of decisions, but you can lead up, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and encourage those that you report to really think strategically about our future, particularly now when everyone's struggling, right? But these kind of leaders are captivated by tomorrow's possibilities and are constantly thoughtful about how to grow their organization, both quantitatively and qualitatively. So these kind of organizations who engage in strategic planning, they are disinterested in the status quo. So I'll tell you this much, if you're involved in an organization right now that status quo or bunkering and just kind of coasting along is a value, this is gonna be a hard conversation for them. It's gonna be a hard conversation for you, because strategic planning processes are reserved for those who want to get out of the status quo. They obsess about ideas and innovations that could catapult the organization into a brighter future. And they're always keeping a close and consistent eye on these 8 essentials. So what I love about these 8 essentials is that it's not just this huge document with, in fact, I was studying strategic planning. I was even Googled strategic planning during COVID. Just curious if things are starting to emerge as people think about, because what we typically think about in regards to strategic planning processes will not work in this new day. How can we plan out? How can we plan out a year in advance when we can't even think about a month in advance in some ways, right? So that's why I like this idea of a more fluid strategic planning process. That said, I was just doing some research and realized that only about 60% of organizations, as of a few months ago, so maybe it will change a little bit with the pandemic, only about 60% of organizations think beyond 1 year. They literally live in the year. They don't make plans for post 12 months from now, which I thought was interesting. Also, oftentimes when we think about strategic planning process, we're thinking about a formal document. I want you to never think in that way again. I want you to think about a flexible process, ongoing conversations. The formal document, it feels really good to feel like you've done it, but I've been involved in strategic planning process. We get this great big document. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything. I want to encourage, and this is my premise for today, that a successful strategic planning process is a living document that needs to be revisited regularly, tweaked often, and implemented every single day that we show up to work. And I think that's going to be really, really important. So I noticed you sent out a little bit of a poll already. We have any interesting data that's emerging during that time, Corey?
So for the most part, most folks are refreshing a strategic plan, every year, but the next highest response is every 3 to 4 years, which is pretty
Interesting.
interesting. And about 10% of our responses have never done a strategic plan. They don't strategically plan.
Well, and typically what happens is smaller organizations feel like we don't need to strategically plan because we're just small. Strategic planning process is for large organizations. But here's the thing. We all need a strategic planning process, not just for organizations, but for our lives. So think about that. Do we live life reacting? Do we respond organizationally reacting, or do we get to be proactive? Do we get to be on the front end? Now, we're always being proactive and reactive simultaneously. There are things that we can begin to design right now, but as we've learned during this COVID-19 pandemic, we may need to change plans on the fly. But without that kind of vision, without that kind of process at least in place, particularly if it's organic, and that's what I'm suggesting you today, is that we create an organic kind of 8-step simple process, which is why I've only given you 8 words. I just want you to think about 8 words, because even if you tomorrow show up at the office and you just think about these 8 words, you will be farther ahead in the strategic planning process for your organization than many organizations that have a formal document sitting in some hard drives, some R drive somewhere, ready to be implemented or maybe be reviewed at some point. So I just want to share that with you, but I appreciate you are refreshing. So as you refresh, consider, do your strategic planning processes have these 8 essentials embedded within them? Because I think they're super, super important. And I found them to be incredibly helpful. And even again, we've infused some of these ideas even into unique venues as I work alongside of them. I'm both a consultant with them, but also a client of unique venues. And I have benefited from both of those roles. But I think in many ways, unique venues is really setting the pace in regards to some of these things because of the visionary leadership and thinking ongoingly about these kind of things and not just saying, well, that's something once a year we think about. We'll have our little strategic planning process retreat. I'm actually seeing the poll results right now. About 41% of you have a formally established. And so I'm not asking you to throw it out, but I ask you to maybe encourage you to think a little bit differently about, here we go. I just pulled it up and it took my whole screen. But to think a little bit differently about this, particularly now. I'd be curious how your strategic planning process will change as we think about the reality of COVID-19 and its presence within our industry today. So that said, Allie, Corey, feel free to interrupt me at any point if there's questions. I want this to be, for those of you who know me, I'm much more interested in a conversation than a presentation. I've kind of set the stage, but I just want to kind of talk about each of those 8 essentials that I think need to be kind of the linchpins of what we think about each step of the way, as we're always thinking about the success of our organizations. And so at any point, feel free to interrupt, Corey, Allie, if things are coming, questions, and I will just pivot based upon who is in the room. There's 175 of us here. And so obviously we want to adjust based upon what is actually happening within your hearts and as you think about these things. So first ingredient I want to talk about, which is foundational, is perspective. Perspective. The dream of who we are becoming as an organization of professionals and how we envision a positive future together. We need to have a dream. And again, if you're involved in strategic planning, we're talking about our mission, we're talking about our vision, we're talking about our values. Hopefully that's been a part of your conversation. But more than anything, every organization needs a North Star. A North Star that you can always see out of the corner of your eye about your preferred future and who you want to become and what you want to achieve, right? Now, you're never going to reach the North Star. In fact, on a clear night, which we don't have many of those here in Ohio, but on those rare clear nights when I can actually see the North Star, I love to be able to point to it, but I'm never going to touch it. I'm never going to show up at the North Star, but the North Star allows me to see which direction to continue to go. We've got to have that compelling vision. We've got to have that, mission. What are we about? Our vision, how we go about it, our values. What will it ideally, how we go about as our values vision, what will it look like when we get there? So it's interesting. probably about a year ago, obviously I'm the CEO and president of D&B Coaching. My team came to me, and I teach this. They came to me and said, Michael, what is our North Star? And I stood there. I was embarrassed to say I wasn't quite sure, because I'm doing this for so many different organizations, but I had never taken the time to really think, what does it look like when D&B Coaching becomes the best version of itself as an organization? So I pulled my coaches together, and we started talking and started dreaming. And we actually came up with, our dream is we want to help human beings be fully alive in all 12 dimensions of their life, and organizations to thrive, that organizations would actually be alive, not just filled with living people who breathe, but actually alive in the truest essence. And I wasn't able to have that picture in my head until I was challenged by my team. So some of you who are sitting there right now thinking, I don't know what we're about. I know what we do, but I don't know what the North Star is. I don't know the dreams, right? I don't know the dreams of who we're becoming. And so, yeah, if that's true of you, maybe you can encourage and go to your leaders and say, we need to dream. Like, what are we about? And encourage those who are leading and are supervising you to think in terms of that dream. Please, Corey.
Sorry to cut off. That kind of
Please interrupt. This is exactly what I want.
It intertwines with the question that we received. I'll just kind of read the text. My biggest challenge is trying to get my clients to have strategic plans. I do business development for them, and it is really sad they aren't thinking ahead and just constantly in operational chaos. Any tips to help them plan ahead? For some, not doing this is getting existential.
Oh, yeah. Well, and in many ways, that's the challenge. We tend to, as human beings and as organizations, we allow ourselves to be ruled by the tyranny of the urgent. Like, what needs to happen today? And we focus more on tasks than outcomes. We think about, these are the things we need to do. And we tend to be reacting. And oftentimes so that's why when you think about strategic planning process, it needs to be prioritized as opposed to just hoping that it happens. So for instance, let me talk about that second. Now you've talked about perspective. You need to have a dream. But let me talk about that second, and this may actually answer your question. The second P is priorities. Now, when I talk about priorities, I'm not talking about tasks. I'm talking about outcomes. Those outcomes that are most primary, that are most important for the success of the organization. What are the outcomes? What do we want to achieve? Now, the outcomes, the priorities need to be connected to the grand perspective, the dream, the North Star, right? But if you can just even get an organization to think about perspective and priorities, how dynamic would that be? How dynamic that would be just to think in terms of those things. Now, the more people you have involved in this process, the better, because it builds buy-in, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But so often we think about the inputs, what we're actually doing, versus the outputs, what are our efforts actually accomplishing? So back to what the question that came through Corey is, you need to not just prioritize your schedule as a company, you need to schedule your priorities. You need to actually schedule in this priority to strategically plan, to have these ongoing conversations. Because how sad would it be? And I'm seeing this happen in organizations all the time. They're spending 40, 50, 60 hours a week doing things, if I may say, that don't matter. Who wants to be living life like that? To be engaging in activities that don't actually matter, that don't actually produce the outcomes or help you achieve the mission, the vision, the dream, the North Star that you want to become. So you need to have the big picture, but then you also need to think about, what are my priorities? What are those? And you're going to get this in your document. See, I didn't want to give you all this in advance because I want you just to kind of be fully present with me right now and engage in this conversation and let your imagination kind of go as you think about these 8 big ideas. And you'll get more details in those when I send out the document thereafter this webinar to those of you who attended. But I want you to think in terms of those big pictures. Perspective, priorities meaning those outcomes. Now what happens is we don't think about outcomes, we think about inputs, because urgent, there's things to be done this week, the flurry, right? And if you're familiar with Stephen Covey and his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I'm a big Stephen Covey fan, and that matrix to look at the difference between urgent and important. Urgent things are those things that we're reacting to. The important things are those that we're acting upon, being proactive. Now, during COVID and during pandemic, we're always reacting, right? Things need to change and shift, but we also need to be very proactive to be building. That's what I'm telling all of my clients. And I'm encouraging unique venues, and I'm encouraging even those of you who are attending that I've already had conversations with, that you're kind of partnering with unique venues and helping them allowing them to help you become more successful. A lot of the conversations are already happening, and those conversations go something like this. What are your priorities, and how can we help you do this during the pandemic? Because the tendency is during the pandemic to hit pause. Let's just bunker down, hit pause. No, friends, now's the time to build. Because when things become more normal, and again, what does that even look like in the new normal? You will be miles ahead of your competitors in regards to, maybe it's planning events, maybe it's creating COVID-resistant environments, maybe it's the virtual meetings, depending on what organization you're involved with. Like, now is the time to be building, to be growing, now you may not be able to implement those things yet, but taking time to think like this is really, really strategic. So those are the first 2, perspective priorities. Are there any other questions that are coming, Corey, that seem to tie into those first 2, or should I continue on with our other?
Well, yeah, we've got a pretty good question from someone coming in that basically has said that with, COVID being the main focus for a lot of people right now, how do you kind of convince those people, and for this individual seemed the incident management team, to be more open to kind of listening and planning for the future and not being so sidetracked and focused on planning during COVID for COVID? And this question, the person who asked the question has basically admitted to that their clients are wanting some guidance, and unfortunately they're having to wait for that guidance. So how can you can manage both the current climate but also plan for next, and help kind of communicate that to your clients?
Yeah, well, I love that question, and I think in many ways it's both and. It's not either or. It's being proactive and being reactive. But again, it goes back to, you need to schedule time. So for instance, even here at Bowling Green State University, and some of the work that we're doing with creating COVID-resistant, preparing for students to come back, obviously all the conversations for keeping our families safe. I mean, there's so much. We've got to schedule in time to dream and to think about the future, which is hard because we are, and again, what makes this time so unprecedented is this COVID reality is slamming us in such a powerful way. It's hard to think of something outside of that, right? I get it. I feel it. I only have so much margin to think about COVID. And yet I feel like I only have so much energy to think about COVID, but I have to use every ounce of energy to think about COVID. Personally, professionally, I mean, and so in many ways, it's training yourself to be able to say, for the next hour, I'm going to think about what would a new normal look like? What would be the thing I want to build? And then making sure we begin to connect. And again, it's about really planning for your week ahead of your week. It's planning for your next day ahead of your day. Because typically what happens is we show up on the morning of Monday morning or Tuesday morning, you're thinking, okay, what do I got to get done today? As strange as it may sound, responding to every email in your inbox may not be the most effective use of your time. You might actually say, today I'm not going to respond to an email, but I'm going to actually dream, and I'm going to plan, and I'm going to be thinking about the future, because I don't want to be behind the 8 ball. I don't want to be lagging because I'm not taking time to prepare. Now, we've got to be very COVID focused, and we need to obviously deal with this pandemic that has landed in our laps that no one shows. It's affecting the entire world. But we also need to simultaneously begin to imagine, in light of what we're experiencing, what is the new normal, and beginning to reimagine a strategic, which is why this whole is called Reimagining a Strategic Planning Process for the Future in the New Normal. We don't even know what the new normal is going to look like. But that's what's so great about this idea and this philosophy of strategic planning. If you can just think about those 8 ideas. So for instance, if every day, maybe not every day, every few days or even week, you come in and you think about these 8 ideas, just to take 15 minutes and just run these 8. What is our perspective? What is our dream? Our mission, our values, our North Star. What are our priorities? What are the outcomes of our organization? What do we want to be true? and then continue to move through. You can literally just put yourself in a meditative, professionally meditative state every day to continually remind yourself of these things. And I think just by training yourself to do that, you don't need a whole day. Maybe it's 15 minutes a day, right? So something just popped up on my screen.
Sorry, yeah, pool number 2 is launched.
Oh, it's launched. Okay, so please, Corey.
This is a really great question. I'm actually very eager to hear how you respond to this.
Yeah.
I'm going to read it word for word. What is your recommendation for one-person offices or teams that have to get the tasks done and may not have as much time to change to an outcomes-focused approach?
Yeah. Well, we never have enough time. How many hours in a week? Is it 168? I always forget how many hours in a week. We all have the same amount of hours, right? What makes someone elite or an organization elite is how they choose to invest those hours. So every hour is either spent or invested. Now, so what I'm going to encourage, even the one person office, there are things that you might be doing that you don't need to do. Or at the very least, you can pause for an hour, right? To focus on some of those other things. But now if you're thinking in terms of I need a week to do strategic planning, you don't have a week. Quite honestly, I don't think you should take a week, because part of being great leaders and being incredible teams, and even if you're a one-person team, is the ability to both focus on the future while being fully present in the present. So you need to do both. So even if my encouragement to you is even to take 15 minutes every few days and pause and say, what is my perspective? Do I have a plan? Again, I'm going to move forward here. People, who is in the room with me? For you, the one person, you're like, I'm alone. I'm the people. But even with the people, let's talk about that. So let me just keep moving through my 8 essentials. And then I'm just curious if that continues to bring more questions. So perspective, priorities. Here's a third thing, a plan. This is the decision to establish strategic, measurable, and achievable goals, right? The plan. Get the big picture. We've set our priorities and outcomes. Now comes the plan. But not only what are going to be those achievable goals, but corresponding actions in order to achieve those goals and those organizational priorities. So for me particularly, I'm thinking in terms of when I think about a plan, I want the plan to tackle culture, choices, and communication. A plan that addresses those 3 things. What is the culture we're creating, the choices that we're making, so those tasks, and then also communication, how we're talking to each other. So it's interesting, one of the things as I was studying strategic planning, oftentimes strategic planning processes fail because the communication channels are not in place to actually implement something of that nature. Communication's poor within organizations all the time. Because again, we're reacting, this is happening, we're reacting, versus making sure that we're communicating and we're interacting, we're bringing people involved in that. But you got to have a plan. It's one thing to say, here's a grand perspective. Secondly, here's this amazing outcomes and priorities. But what is actually going to be the plan? What is the plan of action for each week, maybe for each day, to actually achievable, measurable, strategic goals in light of that grand perspective, in light of those priorities, with corresponding actions. Now, again, I'm getting into the weeds a little bit. We're talking about philosophically right now, but there are very practical things we can do to actually create a plan that is doable even for the one-person office or the two-person office or the large office, right? The large department, the large organization. And so, but we need a plan. You got to have a plan, because though, not to be trite, I forget who said it, but those who fail to plan can plan to fail, right? But we need to have a plan, and the plan needs to be specific. Fourth, if I can share about this, people. Now, I could spend a long time talking about this. And to the person who's the one-person team, I'm sorry, I hope this still is relevant to you, but who is in the room? Who is on the team? Who have we hired? I actually have an entire curriculum that I call Hiring and Inspiring the Best and Brightest. It's actually a retreat. It's a consulting program that you can purchase through unique venues. Because here's the challenge, and I'm going to say this. I'm not going to hear you say it, but I know it's happening. Let me just say it out loud. In America, we tend to hire too quickly and fire too slowly. I'm already hearing the amens, right? Because I think what happens is, who's in the room? Who are the people? Who are the people? How do you hire and inspire the best, and the brightest? Now, within these people, is there competency? Is there character? What's really true? And so when I think about hiring the right people, surrounding myself with the right people, I'm thinking about a powerful camaraderie, positive communication, and here's the biggest thing: progressive conflict resolution. The challenge that becomes, how do we have the right people in the room that can resolve conflict, that can get along? And this is where organizations rise and fall. That's one of the reasons I love working with unique venues. Talk about a team that knows how to resolve conflict, that knows how to have those hard conversations, that knows how to engage in the difficult matters of growing and improving, doing honest assessment, evaluation. I mean, that's going to be really, really important. Who are the people in the room? So I just want to encourage you that a part of the strategic planning process is, what are the qualities of the people we hire? How do we make sure we're hiring? And because again, hiring is hard. How do you know? You read a couple letters of recommendation, you're hoping for the best. You look at a resume, it's like, but haven't you hired? You thought for sure this was going to be amazing. And then you're going, but there's other times you're like, I'm taking a risk. And you're like, that was the best risk I ever took. This person is like unbelievable, extraordinary leader, and so forth. So that's part of the strategic planning process, is always evaluating who are the people in the room, and are they leaders? Are they empowered, and so forth. So I'll keep moving forward, and then we'll keep fielding some questions as we go. But the fifth P is preparation. Preparation, the development of character and competencies of your people. How are you preparing them to be next level professionals, to be elite professionals? Because in many ways we hire folks, they come into our world, and how are we preparing them not only to implement our strategic planning process, but also to become the best version of themselves? So if you remember even what I said when I talked about perspective at the beginning, friends, and perspective is just, who are we becoming as an organization? Not just what are we achieving, but who are we becoming? Because I think we'd all agree, who people are becoming as human beings and as professionals outside of the office, when they step into that office climate, when they step into our organizations, they're actually bleeding out more of who they are in those spaces. So when I think about preparation, when I think about preparing them, I want to help them develop their character and their competencies. If either of those are missing, they're probably not great team members. I mean, character are basically that idea of trust and loyalty, that you know that there are people in the room who aren't cutting corners, they're not taking shortcuts, and they are all in all the time. When they show up, they are there. They are fully present, and they are ready to contribute to the larger vision. And we trust them. Character is felt in relationships. It's revealed in crisis, because right now we're going through crisis. It's revealed. We can see what character is true based upon what we're going through right now. And it's also lived out in private. So who you are when no one is looking is who you really are. Character. But then also competencies. The ability to get a job done and to do it with excellence. You know, and here's what's so sad to say. I know people of tremendous character who I will not hire because they can't get the job done. So they need to have competencies. What does it mean to actually, the training, the human resources, give them the skills that they need to perform at high levels. But what we find is, if they're leaky buckets in regards to character, if I can't trust them, it's not worth the investment. So you need to have both character and competence. And that's part of the responsibility of our leadership communities, of our organizations, to model character, to model trustworthiness. If there is a lack of character at the highest level of your organization, where you're actually following people you can't trust, it's going to be hard. So again, I appreciate, Allison, you reminding. The first four P's: perspective, priorities, plan, and people. 4 more. Preparation, we just talked about. 3 more. Proactivity. The daily decisions, let me say this twice, the daily decisions of every team member to stick to the plan. Proactivity. Because here's what happens. You hire the right people, you have a plan, we've got to be able to proactively every day stick to the plan. And this is where calendar and checkpoints come in. You need to have a calendar that everyone can see. We need to actually schedule our priorities within that calendar, and there's checkpoints. We check in and say, is this being accomplished? Some people do that on Slack. Some people do that in their weekly team meetings. Whatever that looks like, we need to be high accountability, as I talked about in the opening description of this webinar, but low control. The challenge is we typically, in some organizations, want to control people, right? We want to empower people. High accountability, high standards, but then we give you the ability to figure out how to achieve those. Okay? So, proactivity. The daily decisions of every team member to stick to the plan. 2 more. And this is going to be, this one here is really important. 7, problem solving. Which is what we're doing right now in the middle of COVID. This is what we're doing right now. We're trying to troubleshoot problems. We're trying to both anticipate obstacles, act upon obstacles that threaten the organization's success. And in many ways, we're spending a lot of time doing this. Trying to figure out. So I use the term obstacle because I don't like the word barrier. There are no barriers. Everything is an obstacle that can be overcome, a hurdle that can be jumped. Part of it is always figuring out what to do. So if you ever have a problem you're facing, you're like, I don't know what to do. Like, this is a dead end. It's never a dead end. We've got to work around it. Now, part of that is acting upon obstacles as they come. So if you're working at a university and they shut down the university and say there are no external events allowed on our campus, or you're in a COVID spiked area of the country and your event center or wherever you are in hospitality, it's like, we can't do this, or we're going to have to do it this way. Or we're going to, and I've been reading some interesting things. I love, my membership in unique venues, I love my leads, but just reading all of the emails and the different kind of feedback and that whole support system, it's worth it to me to be a premium member just for that, because there's so much insight there. But what we're seeing is we're seeing innovation happening. People are sharing and saying, how are you? And trying to get around the obstacles and figure things out. I love that about unique venues. I love that about our partners, and I love that about you. Even the 158 people who are still joining us today, is the ability to problem solve. Now, what that means, though, and if I could say this quite candidly, we have to be honest with each other. So the ability to anticipate obstacles means it presumes an honest, extensive, and ongoing assessment of the organization that we're including people in. We're seeking feedback from professionals at all the levels. We're asking the really hard questions, and we refuse to spin the data. We refuse to justify the challenges we're facing. Let me say it this way. Reality is our friend. Reality is our friend. And so don't be afraid to look long and hard at an organization, because typically what's happening now is people are getting territorial. They're like, I got to protect my area. I got to make sure everyone feels like I'm doing a great job and that it's indispensable. Instead of protecting and trying to pretend that it's indispensable, be indispensable. Be essential. Step into those spaces. I tell you what, there are two kinds of professionals. Problem spotters and problem solvers. And I'll tell you what, you want to be on the team, whatever team, and you want to be indispensable to a team, into an organization, right now during COVID, be problem solvers. Be asking the hard questions, be thinking creatively, be reimagining yourself. Because again, these 8 things that I'm talking about, they actually can be applied to your personal life too. And that's another conversation for another day. But that's how, these are the 8 things I'm looking at all the time and how I'm growing as a person. Am I surrounded by the best people? Do I have a plan for my life? What's my grand perspective of who I want to be at the end of my life? Am I being proactive? What are the problems and the challenges that I need to actually look at and say, I'm not going to be stuck here. I'm going to get around them. I'm going to figure this thing out. Problem solving versus problem spotting. And that's what makes it really important that a strategic planning process, if I can get back to our big conversation, what makes it so important to be organic and to be flexible and to be actually living is that, imagine if you do a strategic planning process at the beginning of a year or a 3-year plan, and you're talking about the problems you need to solve. Your problems next week are going to be different. Your obstacles 2 weeks from now, you didn't even anticipate them. And so you always have to be able to jump back into this conversation and this process and actually be able to, and this is my final P, with persistence to stay the course. The leadership's commitment to stay the course in charting this preferred future while pushing through barriers, climbing over obstacles, maneuvering around roadblocks that threaten organizations' growth and success. So it's the ability to, at any point, let's be very practical. Something's going on. You pull people together and say, this is happening. Are the right people in the room? Are we being proactive? Does our plan fit the reality in which we're in? Let's remind ourselves of the North Star. To be able to have even an hour together in the midst of your week to say, everyone hit pause, come together and just review and just let your mind wander. Of these 8 essentials, how are we doing? Where are we? And so that's actually one of my practical takeaways for you, is if you take these 8 essentials and you list them down get a piece of white paper, and you write down the left side all of these 8 essentials. And then at the top, you make 2 columns next to it. The top of the first column, you write Corey Salem. Rank myself in regards to those 8 essentials. How am I doing personally as I think about those 8 essentials? And then secondly, your organization, unique venues. How are we doing in regards? Rank yourself 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being, and actually look at that and say, I'm actually not very good at these essentials. But then you compare those and you begin to really think about, organizationally and personally, as I think about strategic planning process for my life and my organization. These 8 essentials, they can be jumped in. They don't have to go in any particular order. You can keep saying, today we're going to invest on this, problem solving. Or we're going to tweak our plan. Or let's have an honest conversation for just the next 20 minutes on what are our outcomes. And you force yourself to continue to be working through all of these 8 things organically as a living document all the time. So I'm going to pause there for a second. I'm sure there's questions coming. We have 13 minutes left in the webinar. Thoughts, questions?
We've got a couple of good comments, which I'll kind of get to, but I just have a question, thinking about myself personally and looking at all of these.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate enough to be on some great teams with great people. So it's never been the people or the prioritization, having the hard conversations that's been hard. But I think now, even especially the problem solving, how do you not get burnt out? Because I feel like that's all we're focused on right now. And how do you not allow yourself to get to a point just being like, there's too many problems, I'm just throwing in the towel and waiting for someone else to solve it?
This is going to sound trite in my response, but just for the sake of time, unique venues, you can actually go back and listen to my conversations, staying relationally connected to human beings who are empowering you, inspiring you, emotional well-being, physical vitality. We actually did the wellness series with unique venues to answer that very question. Because what happens is, let me say it this way, empty cups can't pour. And so if we're not full, if you come into space on Monday morning and you are bone dry and you are burnt out, right? And that's what happens. We can cop out, we can burn out, or we can flame out. Use those terms. And copping out means I'm just going to throw in the towel. Burning out means I'm trying to give it my all, but I have nothing left to give. Flaming out means I'm making bad decisions where I'm shortcutting my character and I'm making poor decisions that are actually going to blow up and actually going to create problems. Flaming out. But I think what you're talking about is burnout. Corey, I'm feeling it. I was sharing with my clients and this made them a little nervous. Can I just be honest with you, unique venues? And honest with you, to those who are listening, there are days I wake up and I'm like, you know what? I'm not sure I want to get out of bed. The day seems intense. I'm in higher education. I'm working with professional athletes. I'm working with college athletics. I mean, all of these COVID things that are happening are affecting so many areas of my life, my own family. I have 9 children, trying to keep them safe. And and I said this to recently one of my clients, and they said, oh my gosh, it feels so good to be mentored by someone who is a co-struggler. So I need you to hear me say this. I'm a co-struggler during this time. But also, that individual also said, but it also makes me really nervous because if you're struggling, how much more are we all struggling? Because you're the one who thinks about this and kind of coaches people on this all the time. There is no perfect person through this process. And at the end of the day, I need to be able to say, Corey, Allie, others who are listening, I need to be able to say, I just got to turn it off. And I need to make sure that I'm really focusing on extraordinary self-care during this time. Because all that I have on any given day in the middle of this pandemic, in the middle of this unprecedented time, the most precious resource of all is me. Me, myself. At any point when that's beginning to sag, all the conversations we're having right now mean nothing. I hear. So
Yeah,
let that be an inspirational moment. Others.
I watch John Oliver a lot, and sometimes I just have to remind myself it's okay to have 30 seconds of selfish disappointment and upset about the situation, and just to vent that and then get back.
Absolutely. Well, even what's interesting, I'm actually working with some athletes right now. On the one wall of one of their training rooms, it says mental toughness. And I think we're all looking for ways to have mental toughness during this time. And I said to this group of athletes, I said, and they actually were all men, they were all male identified athletes, men. And they said, I said, you want to really be certain to have mental toughness during this time? They're like, yeah. I said, make sure you're crying at least once a week. What? And so getting a good cry in and laughing really hard, like if you can really laugh and cry in any given week, both hard, you're going to be in a great spot. So that's the counselor in me coming out.
Nice.
Others, we have 9 minutes. Any other questions about this? And again, you're going to get a document that's going to give you more explain. And again, we're here to serve you, Unique Venues. If you want us to meet with your team and help you go through this process, we will do that with you because it's organic. It's a new way of thinking, but I think it's been very helpful for a lot of organizations.
Here's a good question from an individual who works at a venue that kind of has 2 different business areas under one umbrella, 2 kind of different focuses and sides of the business. And the question is, how can you help cultivate a culture of strategic planning and North Star focus when you have an organization that is split into 2 different, focuses? And as a leader on the one side of the business, what can I do to inspire them to work towards coming together to find our like-minded focuses and run towards those goals together?
So I would immediately, as the leader of that one side, go to the leader of the other side and say, I need you. I appreciate you. Here's what this is about who you are that inspires. See, what happens typically is we want to go in with a critical mindset versus a complementary. So when I'm building bridges to other partners, I'm coming in great humility and with honor and say, here's what I honor you for. And here's what you're doing that's amazing. And just really encouraging. We need each other during this time. Because typically what's happening is we're getting territorial, like I said, but you come together and say, we can take this to the next level. And even the language we're using during the pandemic, we're seeing it all over, right? We're better together. We're better together. So we're going to come together. We're going to work together. We might have different focus. We might have different priorities, but we're all trying to rise together. But what happens is we tend to feel like we have a scarcity mentality. Well, if I include them, then I might lose something. No, anytime we give ourselves away and we enter into partnerships, we grow and we gain. Selflessness versus selfishness, right? It's a brief response because I don't want to take too much time with that. Other questions?
Yeah, no, thanks for the answer.
Yeah, for sure.
I think we kind of touched on this, but maybe this is asked in a different way. So someone's noticed that they're missing the boat on being tactical in future planning with so much focus right now on COVID response. So maybe this is coming from someone who wants to politely remind their leadership that that's important, but we need to, look down the road. So do you have any tips on how to have that kind of conversation with your leadership?
And I think in many ways, it's just it's a similar comment that I just made, is that when we approach our leadership complimentary and not critically. Because if you go and say, hey, we're missing the boat more effectively, you don't think they're freaking out too? You don't think they're feeling burnt out and scared and nervous? In fact, what's interesting at the root of, and I'm going to make a little counseling comment here. I'm going to wear my counselor hat for a minute. But at the root of all of your frustration right now, and all of the challenges you're facing, at the very root of all of it is fear. We're all afraid. And we've got to be able to attack those fears and see those fears, acknowledge those fears. We're all afraid. There's so much uncertainty. This is so uncharted. This is uncharted territory for the entire globe. And so we just need to give people grace, and we need to be patient and humble, and we need to be honoring people and saying, you know, the issue is not that you need to get your act together, but like, how can I serve you? How can I help you? Or even just living it out. See, oftentimes we express the things that we want from our leadership without embodying them. Embody them first. Let them notice that. So let me go back to tactical. I would say, and even on my own calendar here, on my Outlook calendar, I have in unique venues who know me best, you'll appreciate this, but I actually have time on my calendar that just says thinking. And that's as much of an appointment. And sometimes it is the person I'm sitting across from. If I have a meeting, because some people will, so if someone calls in and says, is that person available? They're in a meeting right now with myself. But in many ways, I need to get tactical. So sometimes I just need to pause and say, I'm going to just take some time to be tactical. I'm going to be thoughtful. I'm going to run my mind through these 8 things. Again, don't think this is going to, even small baby steps in this regard into developing a strategic planning process mindset. Take 15 minutes, shut everything out, and actually see if you can, 15 minutes. Good start. And in many ways, you might just identify one tactic in those 15 minutes that will add tremendous value to the outcomes of the organization just by pausing to think tactically. So it goes back to when people say, how do I find time? Don't think about finding time. Think about making time. You carve out time. You get to choose your 160, I may be wrong again with my math, but 168 hours a week. But everyone has the same 168 hours a week. So it's how you choose to either spend or invest that time, right?
Mm-hmm. So I guess kind of the last question maybe to round this out, we've got our 8 Ps, which I'm going to listen. Let me know if I get this right. Perspective, priorities, plan, people, preparation, proactivity, problem solving, and persistence.
Yes, and those will be coming out in a document that will have more definition and more meat to them, but I wanted you just to grab those big ideas. Yes, sir.
We've got the handout coming.
Yep.
You've talked about kind of how you and how unique venues can help in this area. Are there any other resources that kind of come to mind if people want to do their ancillary research outside of this to help kind of go along with what we've talked about today?
Yeah, and again, can I be honest? I've not seen a lot of, if you're looking for a good book, for instance, I can't find one that I feel like fits the times in which we are. And so maybe I'll write one. Maybe we'll work together. Corey, Alex, and DB Coach will come together and write one, because I think it's time to really reimagine. And I think strategic planning has always been challenging. I just am not seeing it. So resources, part of it is that I'm Googling strategic planning process for COVID and just seeing what's out there and thinking critically about that. But I think that's why I left you. I want to be able to give you 8 words and 8 big ideas, and then let you contextualize that into your context. Because that's the challenge. That's the challenge is if you're looking for a resource that's going to give you the strategic planning process kind of template. We talked to the person already who has a 1-person team, right? You have others here who have huge teams. We talked about another person who has teams in different kind of funnels, different areas. We have to be able to have bigger ideas, bolder ideas that we can contextualize within. So that's what's great is you want to have an outside voice. If you want to go down this process, you want to have an outside voice who can step in, who can take these 8 areas and actually contextualize them within your context. Or you can do that. If you feel equipped to do that, take these 8 big ideas in the handout that you'll see, and you go back to your organization and do that. But if you're like, we need a little extra help, then call upon us to help, and we'd be glad to step in and help you contextualize that for your group. So I think we're all looking for that magic bullet, right? That magic template for strategic planning. But again, then it loses the whole essence of what I'm sharing with you today. It needs to be organic. It needs to be contextualized to your world and your personalities and your people and your priorities and your North Star. This is, of all things, of all conversations I've had, this is the least cookie cutter conversation. There's just not a clear template for these things. Think in regards to the big ideas.
Great. Well, in a time where it feels like time goes so slow in COVID, you find a way to make it go quick, Dr. Brown. So
My
thanks
pleasure. Yeah.
for
Thanks, Corey.
spending an hour with us today. Unfortunately, we are going to have to end it. Thanks everyone so much for your support and participation today. Unfortunately, I don't have a schedule of events lined up right now. Through your feedback today and kind of through some of the conversations we're having as a team, we'll have a schedule of webinars coming up in August and September. We're going to kind of be rolling these out 2 months at a time as per usual. But thanks so much everyone for joining us today. Good luck with your own strategic planning endeavors. And as always, if you ever need us, we're happy to help. We'll be sending out a link to this recording. Feel free to go to our resources page to find kind of some other information as we make it available. We've got a lot of great tools to help you communicate to folks, stakeholders, your community during this time, changing the 4 C's to be more compassionate. We've got some other really good resources, especially if you're a campus or other venues that you need to kind of remind folks the value that you bring as conference and event directors and kind of the value that you bring your institutions to. We've got that for you. And again, if there's anything you need, just let us know. On our YouTube channel, we've got our other conversations with Dr. Brown that kind of touch upon what he brought up earlier and some questions. But that's it. That's kind of what we have for this time being. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. And we hope to see you again in the future. Thanks, Dr. Brown, for your expertise as always. Have a good day, everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
Take care.
Bye.